I've been a gamer for about 20 years or so, and I've been a feminist for maybe 4 years. And one of the biggest problems with video games as a genre is how they portray women. But before I start getting into things, let me just talk about these things real quick. AAA games. AAA games are the equivalent of blockbuster movies. They're the games that cost the most money to make, they make the most money, and they have the biggest advertisements. They are the most impactful games on the industry. And when I'm speaking about games, developers, and publishers, I'm referring to AAA games and their developers and publishers. And the second term is gamer. So what's a gamer? A lot of people have the idea that a gamer is a middle-aged man that lives in their parents' basement. That's not what gamers are. Gamer is a person who plays games. That's it. They can be a woman, they can be a man, they could be a gender like I am, so no association to any gender. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is that person plays video games. So, first, and probably the biggest trope in video games is the damsel in distress. Everyone knows this. Everyone has seen it in some fashion or another. It is ridiculously popular in games such as The Legend of Zelda and Mario. And it is when a woman gets kidnapped and a man has to go and save her. Now the problem with the damsel in distress trope is because it is so overused and repeated all the time, it creates the idea that women cannot take care of themselves, that they need a man to save them. And so it reinforces the idea that women are submissive and passive, and that men are active and dominant. And that's the only thing that is the case. And that you can't have a dominant and active woman, and you can't have a submissive and passive man. This is hurtful to society and how we interact as people, because we aren't like that. There are men and women that are active and submissive, and passive and dominant, or the other way around, or anyway, in fact. It doesn't matter. And one of the other problems with the damsel in distress trope is that it objectifies women. It creates, they're objects, they're not people. And very often there are objects of sexual desire intended to arouse the men who are the target audience of these games. But they aren't allowed to have a sexuality of their own. They are an object for men to be sexual. They aren't allowed to have sexual feelings or have desires. They're supposed to be desirable. And this further strengthens the idea that women are passive and submissive, and that men are active and dominant. And because developers and publishers are creating so many games that have these ideas that women are passive and submissive, that and that their target audience are straight white men, it creates a problem that we don't have many playable female characters. In 2013, there were 3 AAA games that had exclusively playable female characters. Those games are Remember Me, Tomb Raider, and Beyond Two Souls. And one of the reasons why this happens is because developers and publishers don't think that their audience have women in them. They're only making games for men. And that's a problem because about 50% of the audience for video games are in fact women. And more women would play video games if they had more playable female characters. More characters to relate to. Characters that are strong and have strong personalities, varied personalities, and aren't just a copy-paste of booze. So why? Why is this the case? Why is this always happening? Why are women so sexualized? Why? Well, like I said before, video games are targeted at men because we, as a society, think that women aren't supposed to play video games because video games are for men. They're violent. Women don't like violence. Come on, guys. Violence is for everyone. Also, publishers are afraid to take risks. They don't want to lose money. They just want to make money. They don't care about the consumer. They don't care about who you are as a person. They just want your money. And that's why they're making games, for your money. And making games with women in them is a risk. Because, next point, publishers don't think that games with women sell. Last year, a game called BioShock Infinite that was developed by a company called, I forgot the name. Oh, not important. Irrational Games, that's what they came out with the box art for their game, and the female character in the story was removed from the cover. And this created a backlash because that character was extremely important to the story. And the excuse given by the publisher and developer was that women on covers of video games don't sell as well as video games that don't have women on them. And around the same time, a company called Naughty Dog was developing a game called The Last of Us. And they were approached and said that they shouldn't put their female character on the cover because the game would sell less. However, they decided to keep the female character on the cover. So this happened. The Last of Us sold 6 million copies to date. Tomb Raider sold 6 million copies. And BioShock Infinite has sold 3.4 million copies. And The Last of Us sold 3.4 million copies in the first 3 weeks of it being out. These games are different genres. They're different types. And so it's hard to compare what the sales number would be if they would actually be different. However, BioShock Infinite and The Last of Us are two of the highest regarded games from 2013. Most people who have played these games consider these games to be the two best games of that year. And to see that BioShock Infinite sold only 3.4 million copies on 3 different systems, whereas The Last of Us sold 6 million copies on 1 system, because it was an exclusive game to Sony. And so it did not come out on the Xbox 360 or on PCs. So what can we do about the problems in our industry, in the industry as a whole? Well, we can, first of all, boycott video games with poor portrayal of women. That's pretty straightforward. Just don't buy it if it's bad. We can get informed on feminist sources, such as Feminist Frequency. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. And we can inform developers and publishers about what we think is wrong with the industry, what we want to see from the industry. And that's a very hard thing to do because there aren't many ways we can do that. And so the social media is pretty much the only way we can do that, because their support system and their contact us links are only for support or problems that you may have in terms of technical problems in their games, and not, your game is sexist. And so what I would consider the biggest publishers, I put there, so it's Electronic Arts or EA, Activision, and Square Enix USA. They're not the only ones by far, but they are probably the 3 biggest companies that aren't Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. And so some good feminist sources. Anita Sarkeesian from Feminist Frequency, she launched a Kickstarter campaign to talk for a YouTube video series that was entitled Tropes vs. Women, the Problematic Portrayal of Women in Video Games. And she got a lot of hate for that Kickstarter campaign. She got death threats, she got rape threats, and just all sorts of awful, awful things sent to her. And this shows a problem in not only the industry, but also in the community. And this is why we need so much change in the industry, because that's how it'll help the community improve. Publishers and developers would make better games, which would improve our social understanding and our social views in video games. And it's really important that we do this. The second source is Jim Sterling. Now, Jim Sterling started off as a very sexist and pretty awful person. However, he recently, well, a couple of years ago, maybe a little bit more, changed his views on women and feminism and how women are portrayed in video games. And while he does not call himself a feminist, because he doesn't feel like he's earned the right to call himself a feminist because of all the awful things that he said in the past, he's working hard to show and talk about all of the problems, not only with women, how women are portrayed in the gaming industry, but with the industry as a whole. And I highly recommend his videos. They are, however, they have a lot of satire, so don't take his argument with a grain of salt, but what he's saying between the arguments, because he can sound like a pretentious person. And the last source that I also highly recommend is Polygon. Polygon is a really good source of news for video games. They have a lot of feminist critics and reviewers, and it is the only place I go for video games, because it's the only place that I feel represents women well. And that may not be accurate because I don't know every source for video games on the internet, but of all that I've seen, this is the best. And lastly, if you have any questions, if you want to talk about any of these things, I highly encourage you to come talk to me. Email me or any of these things, because I'm always happy to talk about this. This is an important topic and it needs to be discussed, because these problems are not only affecting video games, but media as a whole. And yes, that's all I have to say.